Welcome to Tales with Tunes. Our story begins on a crisp autumn night. The wind whistled a lonely tune as it rustled through the dry leaves scattered across the farmyard. Nestled amongst the warmth of the hay in the stable lay Max, a sturdy sheepdog with a thick coat the color of burnt caramel. Unlike the usual bustling activity of the farm, tonight was unusually quiet. The farmer had finished his chores early, and the other animals were tucked away in their cozy corners, fast asleep. Max, ever vigilant, had taken it upon himself to be the night watchman. He wasn't particularly fond of staying awake all night, but the responsibility weighed heavily on his furry shoulders. He pricked his ears at every rustle and flick of his tail at every shadow cast by the flickering moonlight filtering through the stable window. Hours crept by, and Max's eyelids began to droop. The warmth of the hay and the rhythmic chirping of crickets outside lulled him into a state of drowsiness. Just as he was about to succumb to sleep, he heard a low rumble approaching from the distance. He perked up, his tiredness forgotten for a moment. Max strained his ears, the rumble growing louder with each passing second. He lifted his head, his gaze fixed on the entrance of the stable. A dark shape emerged from the shadows, slowly coming into view under the pale moonlight. It was a donkey, a bony creature with a drooping head and a tired demeanor. He shuffled his hooves wearily, stopping just outside the entrance of the stable. Max, ever cautious, let out a low growl. The donkey flinched, startled by the sudden sound. He lifted his head and looked at Max with large, pleading eyes. "Excuse me," he said in a raspy voice. "May I please come in for the night? I am weary from a long journey, and the wind is biting cold." Max hesitated. He wasn't used to strangers seeking shelter in the stable. He glanced around the stable, his eyes falling on the empty manger filled with fresh hay, a sight that usually brought him comfort. He was about to refuse when a thought struck him. "Where are you coming from and where are you headed?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. The donkey sighed, a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of his journey. "I come from a faraway land," he began, lowering his head slightly. "A land where drought has ravaged the fields, and the animals struggle to find food. I was separated from my herd during a sandstorm and have been wandering ever since, searching for a place to rest and some sustenance." His voice held a tremor of exhaustion, and Max found himself feeling a pang of sympathy. He glanced again at the untouched hay in the manger. It was more than enough for one night. "Well," Max said, his tone softening slightly, "the farmer wouldn't mind if a weary traveler found some rest here." But he added, a hint of his usual vigilance returning, "You must promise to be quiet and not cause any trouble." The donkey's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you," he exclaimed, his voice filled with relief. I promise to be the most well-behaved guest you've ever had. I'm Bartholomew, by the way. Max nodded curtly. Max, he replied. He gestured with his head towards the back of the stable. There's plenty of space over there. You can rest for the night. Bartholomew let out a grateful snort and shuffled his way towards the back, settling down amongst the soft bedding. Max watched him for a moment, a flicker of warmth replacing his usual stoicism. He lowered his head back onto the hay, but this time, sleep didn't seem so unwelcome. With a new sense of purpose, Max kept watch over the stable, his gruff exterior hiding a newfound sense of compassion. The first rays of dawn peeked through the cracks of the stable, painting long streaks of golden light across the hay. Max, ever alert, stirred awake before the first rooster crowed. He stretched his stiff muscles and yawned, a satisfied rumble emanating from his chest. He had successfully guarded the stable throughout the night. Suddenly, a loud snort broke the peaceful silence. Max turned his head towards the back, his gaze falling on Bartholomew. The donkey stood near the manger, his head held high, a smug expression plastered on his face. But what truly caught Max's attention was the sight of the hay in the manger. It was untouched. Not a single strand of hay had been disturbed. Confusion clouded Max's mind. Bartholomew hadn't needed the hay at all. Just then, the stable door creaked open, revealing the farmer carrying a bucket of feed. His eyes scanned the stable, landing on Bartholomew standing proudly beside the full manger. "Well, hello there," the farmer said, his voice laced with surprise. "Looks like we have a new guest this morning. Are you lost, friend?" Bartholomew, still with that smug look, started to weave a tale of his long journey and exhaustion, making no mention of Max, who had allowed him to stay. Max's fur bristled with anger. This stranger, who hadn't even needed the hay, was now trying to take credit for Max's hospitality. He let out a low growl, a sound that startled both the farmer and Bartholomew. The farmer and Bartholomew turned towards Max, who stood with his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Bartholomew's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. "Max, what's wrong?" the farmer asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Max knew he had to explain, but barking wouldn't do. He let out a frustrated yelp and trotted towards the farmer, nudging his hand with his wet nose, then turned and flicked his head towards Bartholomew and the untouched hay. The farmer, a wise man who understood his animals well, looked from Max to the full manger and back again. A knowing smile spread across his face. He turned to Bartholomew, his gaze stern. "It seems Max wasn't so happy with your company this night," the farmer said. He recounted, based on Max's behavior, how Bartholomew had arrived, how Max had offered him shelter, and how the donkey hadn't even touched the hay. Bartholomew, caught red-handed, stammered and fumbled for an excuse. Shamefaced, he mumbled an apology, admitting that he didn't need the hay but had felt entitled to claim the space. The farmer shook his head in disappointment. "Max may be a guard dog," he said, patting Max on the head, "but he also knows the meaning of hospitality. You, on the other hand," he addressed Bartholomew, "have much to learn about honesty and gratitude." Bartholomew hung his head in shame. The farmer, seeing his remorse, offered him some leftover grain instead of the hay. Bartholomew, humbled by the experience, accepted it gratefully. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow on the stable, Max felt a sense of satisfaction. He had not only guarded the stable, but also stood up for what was right. He learned that sometimes true strength lies not just in barking and guarding, but in using your voice, even if it's just a growl, to stand up for what's fair. Bartholomew, with a newfound understanding of kindness and honesty, continued his journey, forever marked by the night he spent in the stable with a gruff but fair guard dog named Max.